A new year in the fight against authoritarianism against the Chinese Communist Party.
I mean, it's like a David and Goliath story.
An aggressive global posture against Lithuania, Taiwan, and the United States.
China has a very, like a schizophrenic relationship with Taiwan.
I sat down with Dr. Antonio Graceffo for a preview of what to expect in China affairs in the new year. This comes as China uses economic pressure on Lithuania, but the Baltic state is fighting back, and how China's economic model and system will be evaluated against the rest of the world. In this special interview, we discuss the threat of communist China to the global economy and how to view the future of US-China politics. Welcome to Talking Points and Happy New Year. This new year, I got the opportunity to speak with Dr. Antonio Graceffo. He is a professor of economics and a China expert who spent 20 years in Asia. He returns to the show to tell us what to look forward to on the US-China showdown in the new year. We begin with the proud achievement of Lithuania, standing up against the aggression from China. Dr. Antonio Graceffo, such a pleasure to have you in the studio today.
Thank you, David. It's good to see you.
Such a pleasure. So, we've been looking at a global situation where a small country, Lithuania, is being pressured by China economically, likely politically, because Lithuania has been upgrading their ties with Taiwan in different ways. So how do you view the situation? Do you think that Lithuania's outcome will be positive in this situation against China?
First of all, I want to say I commend Lithuania, and I'm really proud of them. I mean, it's like a David and Goliath story. It's a very small European country that's taking on the world's #2 power, and that's amazing. We've seen quite a few Eastern European countries that have taken similar stands. Czech Republic, famously, 2 years ago, or a bit more now, it was the mayor of Prague, and then he had a connection with Taiwan, and China objected, and then China canceled some deals. Yeah. So one of the things that CCP does, if you recognize Taiwan, not that anyone's officially recognized them, but if you increase your engagement with Taiwan, they'll cut your trade deals, they'll cut your investment, things like that. The Czech Republic took a huge economic hit because of that. However, they didn't back down. I was really proud of them. With this Lithuania thing, you got Lithuania and then Estonia as well. So there's several other Eastern European countries that, these are people who suffered under communism. They know what communism is. They hate it. Mm-hmm. And they respect Taiwan. And they want to support it. And in the case of Lithuania, what's very interesting is Lithuania was not very much benefiting from having a relationship with China. You have countries like Greece, or Cambodia that are very dependent on the investment that they got from China, and if China threatens them, of course, they'll do whatever China wants because they don't want to lose the money. In Lithuania, the trade minister, I have not verified this, but he claimed Lithuania has invested more money in China than China has invested in Lithuania. What I have verified is that Lithuania's trade deficit with China increased tremendously over the past few years. So Lithuania is not benefiting from being friends with China, and now they have China threatening them, we're going to cut you off economically. Lithuania really stands to lose very little from that. China is, however, putting pressure on other EU members. For example, some German companies use inputs that are made in Lithuania, and they're telling that German company, you can't sell your products in China if they have Lithuanian inputs. So now it's really going to be up to the EU. If the EU stands up to China, which officially the EU has spoken out in support of Lithuania, yeah. So thank goodness for that. And I think that's an improvement over a year ago. Last year, I just had a terrifying, sort of feeling that the world seemed to be apologizing for China, and I saw a lot of governments sort of sticking up for China and things like that. This year, I see the EU taking a stance to support Lithuania, which I appreciate, which we have to see how far that goes. Are they really willing to, if they're going to lose something economically, in order to defend Lithuania? But the president of the EU said that an attack on one of our members is an attack on all of us. So they're very positive. This is my hope, let's say, is it possible that Lithuania will say, we stand to lose nothing, let's go ahead and recognize Taiwan. I mean, I would love it if Lithuania wound up being, the catalyst. The same way like after the fall of, or the fall of communism, it started in Central Europe, that they just stood up, just one country just stood up and said, we're not going to do this anymore. And it caused eventually, everybody to get their freedom.
That's interesting because right now we're actually, we're on the heels of the 30 years of the fall of the Soviet Union this year, Christmas. And we're noticing a lot of the, some of the patterns that happened to the Soviet Union to collapse. It's happening to the Chinese global dominance, right? And Lithuania being one of them. What's the U.S.'s role in this? During the Cold War, they were the main power to push for the fall of the Soviet Union. What is the U.S.'s role in this fight for Lithuania's safety and their financial stability?
I think the U.S. plays a very similar role to what we played in the first Cold War, in the Russian Cold War, which basically we are tying up the enemy economically. The arms race with the Soviet Union is what broke them economically. We have the same thing with China. Donald Trump did a lot of damage to China. People think that he lost the trade war because we still have a trade deficit with China. But actually, I was in China. I was working for a China government think tank. I quantified, to the best I could, the damage that Trump did to China. I mean, it goes into the trillions of dollars between the tariffs, the sanctions, rescinding Hong Kong special situation. And I think that we play a really similar role. And I think that somebody like Lithuania may wind up being the catalyst, but that is only made possible by the U.S. playing the role that we do. And remember that the EU, a lot hinges right now on what the EU does, but what the EU finally decides to do in support of Lithuania, whether they admit it or not, is largely predicated on believing that the U.S. is backing the EU. Let's remember that the EU members then are part of NATO.
Yeah.
Donald Trump forced NATO to change their mandate to include opposing a threat from China and not just Russia. So the EU knows that if push came to shove, the US is supporting the EU against China, and that through NATO we're actually obligated to support them.
Right. So, just to follow up on that, because what's with Russia and Ukraine right now seems to be this tension, right? And it's drawing a lot of the attention away from what China is doing with Taiwan. Could, the EU see Ukraine as the reflection for what China could be doing to Taiwan, in that what Vladimir Putin is trying to do to Ukraine with Russia here?
It's possible. You could certainly make that analogy, and I don't think that's wrong. I wish the world would just leave Russia alone, particularly the liberal media in America, Democratic Party, for some reason, is just obsessed with Russia. And I just feel like we had our Cold War with Russia. It's over. Russia poses us really no threat. There's no point on the map that I could point at and say, this is where there's a conflict between U.S. interests and Russian interests. Of course, we don't want Russia to, invade Western Europe, our allies. We don't want them to. But other than that, China's a real threat. China, or the CCP, I should say, is a real threat. It's our real enemy. And I feel like by concentrating on Russia, we are splitting our attention to a direction that doesn't need to go. It's like a red herring. And also spending our resources on something that doesn't need to be our problem. China's a real problem. We need to concentrate on that. But you're right. It maybe if the EU feels genuinely strongly about supporting Ukraine, maybe they will see that that's the same thing as supporting Taiwan, and they will support Taiwan. I should hope so.
Now, when you, in your experience living in China, did you find that there was with Taiwan, there's a lot of sense of nationalism in that Taiwan is part of China in the Chinese propaganda. And then now there's a huge talking point regarding how China, or the CCP, is following the historical mandate that China will dominate the world as the central, or the Zhongguo, as China calls it, the Middle Kingdom, right? So how can, in a Western ideology or Western value perspective that, democracy is many countries and everybody elect their leaders, really help to convince that, what China is doing is actually not, this historical mandate, but it's actually totalitarian and authoritarian?
Yeah, it's a real issue. So China has a very, a schizophrenic relationship with Taiwan, because on the one hand, they're always like, 我们讨厌他们. They're like, we hate them, but then they can't because Taiwan也是我们中国的. It's like they also belong to us.
Yeah.
And so it's a really weird thing because they want to vilify Taiwan, but they can't because it's part of China, right? And you can't have both narratives going at the same time. And then China's always like, CCP always says, non-aggression, and we only fight to defend our borders, and general prosperity for the world and world community. But actually, China wants to dominate the world, and at the same time, they do publish their 5-year plans and their 10-year plans. They have a plan to be the world's predominant military power by 2030, to be the world's predominant power overall by 2035. This is a published plan. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not something that, in some shadowy, chat room on the internet. I mean, this is real. This is their goal. And I don't know why there should be any question in the West that this is their goal. This is not a benign force, right? This is not, a lot of apologists in the West, they say things like, well, China's been a poor country, they were downtrodden, now they're getting strong, they're like an adolescent who wants to feel their muscles a little bit. Now, they're going to make some mistakes, but we need to tolerate that and understand they're just different from us, but we're equal. No, no, they want to take us over.
We can talk all about the military side, but that's sort of coming to the public eye now that there's a huge brewing potential force of invasion on Taiwan. But, speaking for the economics, what do you think is shutting people's mouth from talking about China? Is it China's economic prowess around the world, or what's gotten them that this, it's the censorship of, we can still work with China, even as we know that Taiwan is becoming a focus of contention now?
Yeah, I mean, it's money. I mean, it's simply money. It is that simple. Many years ago, I was a young assistant vice president of a bank, and my director said to me, I was all excited about an investment deal I wanted to do. He said, sit down. I'm going to tell you the story of the Chinese toothbrush. And there was, I guess somebody went to China in the 19th century, discovered there were no toothbrushes in China. He said, wow, there's 300 million Chinese people at that time. And he said, if I could sell one toothbrush to every person in China, I'll become wealthy. 80 years later, he was still trying to sell toothbrushes in China, and he died poor. And that adage, I always tell my students about that. I go, the fact that there's 1.4 billion consumers in China doesn't mean they're going to buy from you. But the hope of that drives people. It's the same thing that why people go to the racetrack and they bet on horses and lose over and over. Because but next time I'm going to win. And I really think that's what happens with China. I think that these companies look at China and they go, yeah, but if we could just get this Chinese market, we'll be so rich. And there's a human rights thing in Xinjiang, but maybe that's not true. That's just something, that's a conspiracy. Taiwan, but and they're able to close their eyes to all these problems, and even the problems in their own company. You're forced to have a Chinese JV partner. You're forced to transfer your technology to them. But they still do it because of the money that they either actually make in China or that they believe they can make in China.
So then companies like BlackRock, Apple, or Facebook, or not Facebook now, but Tesla, right? They're eager to invest into China because on one hand, like you said, economics and politics can, be two different things. But does China see that way, economics and politics as two different things?
So if we look at the Tiananmen Square massacre, Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping is the person who liberalized the economy, or began liberalizing it, right? 1978, 79. They began opening the economy. And it became progressively more open and open and open. People in the West, our theory always was, well, if they open the economy, it will lead to an opening of civil society. It has to, because we'd never seen a country that had an open economy that did not have an open civil society. And all the dictatorships and autocratic systems, they were poor. In North Korea, whatever. And that's what we thought. And China kept opening, and we said, if we let them open economically, if we encourage them to open, they'll eventually open civil society. And then Deng Xiaoping ordered the massacre of those students. And Deng Xiaoping was sending a very clear message. Opening the economy and opening civil society are unrelated concepts. And we're going to open our economy so we can become rich. We are not going to open civil society. And under Xi Jinping, it's just this reverting to Mao, to Deng Xiaoping. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, he's even quoting both of them quite frequently. I mean, he wants to be the third great leader of China. And he is even restricting the economy now, which they didn't do because they wanted this unbridled economic growth. But he's definitely restricting civil society, and he's even beginning to restrict the economy.
So what do you think that is? Is it he's power hungry, or is he a control freak? And that, I guess to study Mao, you consider him to be on a very extreme end of that, total plan, total control. And then Deng Xiaoping, you could say that he's a little bit more liberalized in the economic aspect. But where does Xi Jinping fit in this spectrum? Is he trying to be the best of both worlds, or what's in his ambition here?
I think the answer is fascism, and that word has come to be synonymous with Nazism, or if you hate Donald Trump, or anybody you hate is a fascist, right? In our side, that's not accurate. Fascism is state capitalism. So under Mao, you had communism. You had real communism. The government owned everything. They owned the factors of production. By definition, as an economics professor, the definition of communism is that the government controls the factors of production and the prices. The quantity of goods that are made and the types of goods that are made are by edicts, by the government. Government says you will make 1,000 blue shirts. They don't know if the people want 1,000 blue shirts, if they want 1,100, if they want red shirts, doesn't matter. I told you to make 1,000 blue shirts, you make 1,000 blue shirts, and the price will be $5, right? They just set a price, pulled out of the air. That's communism. Then you have fascism. Fascism is state capitalism, and what it means is that big companies have private owners, or maybe some sort of what they call public-private partnership, right, where the government partners with private companies. They'll have private owners. The owners are allowed to become wealthy. The government enacts policies that helps the company become wealthy, but when called upon, the company has to act in the interest of the government. Yeah. And that's basically what Xi Jinping has moved the country to, fascism. As I would say 5, 10 years ago, you might have been able to say it was fascism, but you could have argued that it wasn't, that it really was this socialism with Chinese characteristic, market socialism, something like that. But in the last 3 years, 2 years, it's just moved to, it's fascism. It's more, for one thing, one of the marks of, one of the indicators for the liberalization of the economy is what percentage of the economy is dominated by state-owned enterprises. So under Mao, it was nearly 100% of the companies, right? And then under Xi Jinping, it decreased, and it continually decreased. Under Xi Jinping, it has increased.
You mean Deng Xiaoping had a decrease and then Xi Jinping?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I said Xi Jinping twice, right? Yeah, I meant that Deng Xiaoping had a steady decrease.
Right.
Right? So we went from almost 100%, right? Under Mao, if you look at the major banks in China, you have the agricultural bank. Why? That was the bank for the Ministry of Agriculture of China. So all of the agricultural money for the whole country was in that one bank. That's where the name came from. It wasn't pulled out of the air. The Telecommunication Bank, the Bank of Industry, these were the banks for the various ministries of the government. So there were 4 or 5 banks or whatever. And then now you have many banks, right? And this was part of this liberalization. And it continually liberalized. You could plot it on a graph, and then when it gets to Xi Jinping, just let's say the last 3 or 4 years, suddenly we start to have this increase of state-owned enterprises and a spaghetti mess of state-owned, state-controlled, or private companies that have state ownership. Just madness, all the different shades of state ownership and control that we have. And that's why a lot of people criticize economists. They go, if we have 10 economists, we'll have 11 opinions. But I defend it. I say, listen, the reason why you'll read in one newspaper, it says the state sector is 20% of the economy, and another one says 28, another one says 34, and then somebody's way out there, it's 40%. But the reason why is because how do we define terms? State-owned enterprises that are only owned by the government, that's one component. Now we have state-controlled entities where a 100% state-owned entity owns 51% of a private company. And some of these companies are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And the other thing is the New York Stock Exchange is not the whole story. There's the over-the-counter. So over-the-counter, there's so many Chinese companies, and you will read that only 8 or 13 of them or something are state-owned, but actually the number is much larger because even though they're traded on American stock exchanges, the government of China or a government-controlled entity is one of the major shareholders or the major shareholder.
Seems like it's like a pyramid scheme. At the top, you got the CCP, and then down to the bottom. let me just follow up with this for the last question. You mentioned that what's happening with China right now seems like a fascist type of economy, but clearly Xi Jinping doesn't call it a fascism because of the political implications, right? They want to call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. So, is this what we're going to see in the future, where as things start to get more state planned, going back to that 50s and 60s era, that Xi Jinping is going to see that it doesn't need to make up these terms and these characteristics anymore, and in fact they can rebrand itself as such? Or do you think that the root of communism is still going to play this effect there?
That's a good point. So China, or the CCP, loves to label things and make up names for things and use Chengyu and one of the things that Xiconomics, his political theories are not actually quantified yet. So just like the BRI, like the Belt and Road Initiative, there's nowhere that they've published a list of these are the projects that comprise the BRI, and these are the ones that were successful, these are the ones that are failures, or it's going to finish in this year or whatever. There's not. So they can always claim victory because there's no way to measure. So
everything's in the cloud right now.
Yeah. One journalist said, I love this, he goes, if you exist, you're part of the BRI. Because they count everything. They even count projects that go back to like 2004. They go, this is part of the BRI. But anyway, so my point being, they're very vague about some of these things so that he can't be evaluated. So I wonder if Xiconomics is actually quite vague at the moment. And I wonder if, as you're saying, the system will evolve to whatever it's going to evolve to over the next few years, which I assume is more state control. And it's going to look more like fascism to me, but they're eventually going to qualify that as Xiconomics. This is what Xiconomics is. It means, this type of state ownership or something like that. They'll never call it fascism, I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So just a point here is it? I wonder if this is because of political reasons, that they don't want categories of failures or categories of success to be measured against Xi Jinping, because he's trying to suit himself as the paramount hero or the leader of China. Because I guess in Chinese context, an emperor is never wrong, right? And a leader is never wrong, in especially communism and all that sort of thing. So my last point for follow-up is, do you think Xi Jinping is trying to surpass Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping to create this new era that's just him?
Oh yeah, without any doubt. Yeah, that's exactly what he's doing. And you brought out a very good point, which is one of the reasons they don't quantify it now, or they don't qualify it, so that he can't fail. And at the end, they'll look back and they'll point at everything that was successful and they go, that was my plan. All that stuff, And he's the paramount leader, right? He's the first paramount leader.
3 terms now, right?
Yeah, 3 terms. And he's already up there with Deng Xiaoping and Mao, but that's it. He wants to be remembered as the man. And you can't criticize Xi Jinping. He put Xi Jinping thought, is now part of the constitution of the Communist Party of China, so you can't criticize it. It's like basically like going back to the emperor. They only allowed criticism of Mao, I know it was a few years ago, one of the plenaries where they decided that they would allow criticism of Mao, but you were allowed to criticize the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, but not to mention the famine. You can never mention the Great Famine, But with Xi Jinping, you can't even, there's nothing you're allowed to criticize. But yeah, that is definitely his goal. No doubt about that.
Well, Dr. Graceffo, such a pleasure for you to provide us with the insight today.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
Thanks for watching tonight's episode. If you enjoy the content, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below. Follow us on our social media, on Twitter, and much more. Now, before you go, here's something you should know. Don't forget to catch all of NTD's programs on TV. Talking Points premieres Mondays and Wednesdays at 11 p.m. Eastern on NTD. We also broadcast on many of your favorite platforms, including Apple TV and Roku. We're also rapidly growing on cable, satellite, and over-the-air TV all across the United States. Just go to ntd.com/TV, type in your zip code, and find all the ways you can watch. Have a good night.